In a war defined by unpredictable turns and shifting front lines, one military maneuver sent shockwaves across borders and battle maps alike. Ukraine's incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast wasn't just a tactical gamble, it became a defining chapter in modern warfare. What happened in Kursk? What drove the Ukrainian command to breach enemy lines? And what does it mean for the future of this relentless conflict? In this special report, we dive deep into the untold layers behind the operation that changed everything. This is Crossing Borders, the Kursk incursion. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and get ready for the story behind the statistics. In the theater of war, the borders between strategy and symbolism blur. Nearly a year after Ukraine launched a daring incursion into Russia's Kursk Oblast, the echoes of that operation still ripple through diplomatic corridors and battlefield trenches. It began as a shock, a maneuver that rattled the military calculus of the Kremlin and sent analysts worldwide scrambling to adjust their maps, both literal and metaphorical. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky, the architect of this audacious cross-border offensive, revealed in a recent interview with the Washington Post a staggering toll: 80,000 Russian soldiers killed or wounded since the start of the campaign. The figure, while unverified by independent observers, has ignited renewed debates over the operation's tactical brilliance and strategic cost. The incursion began in August 2024 with precision and purpose. Ukrainian forces, advancing with speed and coordination, seized roughly 1,300 square kilometers of Russian territory in a matter of weeks. Kursk Oblast, a region previously deemed peripheral, suddenly became the epicenter of geopolitical intrigue. The offensive's objective was clear: draw Russian troops away from eastern Ukraine, where heavy fighting raged, and disrupt what Kiev claimed were Moscow's plans for a fresh invasion into Ukraine's Sumy Oblast. As with many gambits in war, the initial gains were dramatic. Russian command was caught off guard, its logistics disrupted, and its border defenses pierced in ways not seen since the earliest days of the conflict. But no maneuver in this war remains unanswered for long. By spring, Russia had launched a sweeping counteroffensive, not merely with its own forces, but with the added muscle of a controversial deployment: 12,000 North Korean troops. It was a move that stunned observers, suggesting a widening scope of alliances and a readiness to escalate using proxy forces far from home. This counterpunch pushed Ukrainian forces out of most of the territory they had seized. Villages were retaken, checkpoints reinforced, and the land reconsolidated under the Russian flag. Still, a sliver of borderland remains in Ukrainian hands, a narrow contested strip that Kiev refuses to abandon. Monitoring groups, including Deep State, confirm its existence. Moscow denies it. The truth, as so often in this war, lies somewhere in the fog. Ukrainian officials have leaned into the narrative of attrition rather than territory. They point to casualty figures, emphasizing that while Russia may have reclaimed land, it did so at a punishing cost. In April, Kiev revised its estimates: 25,200 Russian dead, 36,200 wounded, and up to 6,000 North Korean casualties, which account for nearly half of Pyongyang's deployed force. Ukraine's own losses remain undisclosed, further skewing public assessments and leaving space for strategic ambiguity. The operation's early success drew praise from military theorists who saw it as a psychological masterstroke. For the first time in the war, Ukraine had taken the fight beyond its own soil. Kursk was no longer just a staging ground, it was a battleground. Russian civilians found themselves under shell fire, and the invincibility of Moscow's territorial integrity cracked, if only briefly. But enthusiasm gave way to scrutiny. As the front lines hardened and the bodies mounted, critics argued the operation was prolonged beyond its utility. Its promise to stall Russian advances elsewhere, particularly in the embattled Donetsk Oblast, remained unrealized. Resources, manpower, and strategic attention were diverted from other critical fronts. What began as a bold gambit had morphed into a grinding engagement, costly and unsustainable. Beyond Kursk, the war grinds on with renewed ferocity. Russia's offensive in May marked an expansion not just of geography, but of ambition. Its forces now push into Sumy Oblast and Dnipropetrovsk, a central region long viewed as a strategic barrier to deeper Russian penetration into Ukraine's heartland. The conflict is no longer confined to the eastern steppes or southern ports. Its tentacles reach farther west, complicating Ukraine's defensive posture and stretching supply lines thin. All this unfolds against a backdrop of geopolitical tension. Ukraine continues to rely heavily on Western support, particularly from the United States, whose aid remains critical but conditional. Washington's backing, while firm, is increasingly accompanied by calls for transparency, efficiency, and strategic vision. As Ukraine recalibrates its military priorities, it must also navigate the fragile architecture of its diplomatic alliances. The Kursk incursion now stands as a complex monument, both to Ukraine's daring and to the harsh calculus of war. It was a demonstration of agency, a signal that Ukraine would not merely defend, but when necessary, take the initiative. It was also a lesson in limits, that even the boldest moves can come with unintended consequences, especially in a conflict where each maneuver reshapes the battlefield for months to come. As soldiers continue to patrol that contested border strip, as commanders reassess maps and motives, and as families wait for news from both sides, the incursion remains unresolved, not just in terms of territory, but in terms of legacy. Was it a stroke of strategic genius, or a misstep born of desperation? That question lingers, wrapped in the silences of classified briefings and the testimonies of those who fought there. And while the world turns its gaze to newer flashpoints, Ukraine's incursion into Kursk stands quietly defiant. It is a scar on the landscape, a cipher in the war's larger equation, and a story still being written with each passing day. As the war rages on, the scars left behind in Kursk remind us that every maneuver carries weight, measured not just in territory won or lost, but in lives forever altered. Whether bold strategy or cautionary tale, the Kursk operation continues to shape the path of a war with no clear end. And for the soldiers still holding that thin strip of contested ground, the battle is far from over. Thanks for watching. If you found this expose insightful, leave a comment, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of global conflicts. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next report.